world today. As you have no doubt heard from our different teachers over time, Yogananda came to bring a new expression of the ancient teachings of India, of the ancient science of yoga, of Kriya Yoga, and he came to bring them out of obscurity and kind of mystical misunderstanding, and to bring them into the light of day so that common people, ordinary people like all of us could understand them and practice them. Because in the dark ages of Kali Yuga, the understanding of what yoga really was and the relevance in daily life, the understanding and the practice of Kriya Yoga, all of these things were lost. But Yoganandaji and our line of gurus came in part with this mission to show the relevance and the importance in our life, just as the world is today, of the teachings of the great scriptures. And Master spent many years writing commentaries on all the great world scriptures, on the Bhagavad Gita, on the Bible. He did commentaries on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and also on the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which is the mystical teachings of the Sufi branch of the Muslim religion. So he was trying to show that underneath all the forms of religion in the world, there's an underlying reality and relevance. I think that's the important word we need to coming back to, that the practice of yoga, of Kriya Yoga, which is mentioned in the Bible indirectly, in the Gita indirectly, in Patanjali indirectly, all of these things are what we need in the world today to really understand them. Yoganandaji said his commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, where he's really interpreting them in a deeply symbolic level. He said this could not have been written in a darker age during Kali Yuga. It could only be explained in this way in ascending Dwapara Yuga. And so it is with Patanjali too. That's why Swamiji called the book he wrote, based on Master's commentaries, Demystifying Patanjali, because people have relegated it to obscurity, to esoteric teachings that don't have much application. But that's why Swami wrote that. It's why he gave that title, to show that they're extremely relevant. I know some years ago, Jyotish and I were doing a class on the Master's commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, and a woman came to the class. It was a week-long program. And the woman said, "I'm a little afraid to take this class." And we said, "Why afraid?" And she said, "Because I don't think I'm spiritually advanced enough to understand the Gita." And we really reassured her that the Gita was written for everyone. It isn't that only the great sages could understand it. And that's why Yogananda presented it in the way that he did. And so with Patanjali, again, this is often relegated to the realm of esoterica, and we need to understand really what Patanjali is a roadmap that describes the route that every soul takes, regardless of religion or creed or cultural background. Any soul that is seeking to move to a higher state of consciousness, Patanjali describes the route that we will take. And when it's understood properly, it's almost like a manual rather than what in the world is he talking about. And that's the gift that Yoganandaji gave us, and then Swami developed it and presented it more fully. And so we need to understand Master's first book that he wrote in the West was called The Science of Religion. And that's what he was trying to show, that religion isn't just something vague and abstract, but there are rules, there are techniques, there is a universal path through which the soul expands its awareness and moves closer and closer to God, and until final union, yoga, with God is achieved. And that's really what Patanjali is trying to describe to us. He's simply trying to show us, and he was a great master. Yeah, Yoganandaji said he was a fully enlightened master, that he was trying to very simply show us, this is the next step. This is what you will experience when you practice meditation. And this is what you will experience as your consciousness expands. And these are the steps that will take you there. So one of the, I think to keep our discussion brief tonight, Jyotish is going to talk about probably the best known aspect of Patanjali, his eightfold path, and how this represents a roadmap that takes us from our ordinary life to union with God.
Master did not actually write a book on Patanjali, but what he did do was, over a series of about 5 or 8 years, on not every Sunday, but as often as he could, he would gather the close disciples around him after a Sunday service or after the events of that day were finished, and he would explain Patanjali. He would talk about Patanjali. And so it wasn't as if he was writing necessarily to a general public or explaining to a general public. He was explaining more to those serious devotees who had come to live with him and be trained by him. Unfortunately, we're not able to release that book, in part because the notes that we have were taken by in a like a stenographic form from probably Dhyamata, but we aren't even sure of that. But at any rate, we don't have the rights to it, and therefore we can't publish it as a book. But those of us who have been able to look at it, it's really remarkable. And so Swamiji has captured the essence of that of Master's teachings in his book, Patanjali Demystified. So I want to talk about the Eightfold Path. But first, before I do that, let me just touch on the fact that what Patanjali is really talking about here is consciousness. And I was meditating this morning, knowing that there was a class this evening on it. I was meditating on the very first aphorism of Patanjali, well, the second. The very first one, Master went into quite in depth, and that was that, and now we come to the study of the science of yoga. And so Master said that and now means that there was a lot that went on before. The study of the science of yoga is that science which will release us from delusion. The second aphorism is very famous, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirod. And it's the yoga is the release or neutralization of vrittis of chittva. Now, Master described chittva, it's usually translated as mental tendencies or the mind stuff. He said that the real meaning is the primordial feeling aspect of our consciousness. And Swami has often talked over the years how feeling is our basic way of relating, and it comes before the intellect, it comes before the mind. So it's really before mind stuff. And Swami would point out that a little worm doesn't have much of a mind, but it has a feeling nature, so that if there's something like a shocking experience, it knows to wiggle away because it feels that, but it doesn't think it through. Oh my goodness, that must be a 220 volt wire that's exposed over there, you know, it just, so that feeling nature is there first. So what Patanjali is talking about here is our consciousness and how we get free. But interestingly enough, he said that yoga is the neutralization. So we don't have to achieve yoga. We simply have to neutralize those vrittis. And in my meditation this morning, I made a connection. You know, Swami has often described the ego as being a bundle of self-definitions. And we think, well, a bundle, maybe there is like quite a lot of them, like a bundle of toothpicks or something that might have 100 self-definitions. We're talking about millions and millions, because the vrittis, every vritti is a kind of self-definition of feeling. I like this, I don't like this, I want that, I don't want that. And so all of those vrittis are what produce the ego. And when we neutralize that, we don't have an ego, and therefore we go into our natural state, which is union or yoga. And so it's quite interesting. But I want to have enough time to talk a little bit about Ashtanga Yoga, 8-branched, 8-limbed, or 8-fold path. Because this is certainly what Swamiji talked about the most, and what Master also went into in the most depth, because as Devi said, it gives us a roadmap. And we've taught enough students so that we know that people get confused and they try to memorize which one comes next. There's, let's see, it's yama or is it niyama? And then after that, you know, and it's just kind of a foggy mist to them. In fact, we had a week-long course many years ago on Patanjali, and we had a student there who had a good sense of humor. And at the end of the course, we were sharing about, for everyone, what they had learned during the course. And this man said, well, I'm still very confused, but at a much higher level. So we've always enjoyed that comment on Patanjali. So let's see if we can get confused at a higher level here tonight. So Ashtanga Yoga has the 8 limbs, but what I want to present is a kind of a way of seeing that, those 8 aspects, that will make it clear or clearer what Patanjali is talking about, because it's very pithy. And so one way to visualize this is like a target with a bullseye and 3 rings on it. Another way that I was just meditating on, and it came to me, it's also like the spiritual eye, but that's a little more esoteric. But so in a bullseye, or in a target, there's the outer ring of Patanjali is how our consciousness interrelates to the world, which is apparently outside of us. And so, according to our thoughts, our attitudes, our habits, we relate to the world in a certain way. We exchange energy with it, we get feedback from the world, we get feedback from other people, and if we have energies that one could say disturb the world around us, then the reaction of the world is to send back unpleasant or disturbing energies to us. That's the way we learn. And so what Patanjali says is we have to control our thoughts and our behaviors, and that there are 5 behaviors that we have to not allow ourselves to do, and 5 behaviors that we should allow ourselves to do. And that's the yama, or control, and niyama, non-control. So, and then he says that these must be done without regard to time or place. And so he's saying that you simply, if you want to achieve the state of union, and remember this is the roadmap of how to get there, you can't say, well, I'm not supposed to be violent, but it's all right to get a little angry and violent if a driver cuts me off. I mean, that's a good reason we have to control that element of violence or ahimsa under all conditions. Now, it's interesting to contemplate that it isn't just controlling our physical behavior. Many people, probably almost everyone in the room, has controlled their tendency to act physically violent to other people, to the world around them, to animals, to plants, and so on. So most of us have controlled our physical aspect of violence. But beyond that, we have to control our mental tendency, or our attitudinal habits. So if we think thoughts of, if someone does something that we consider wrong, if we have a thought, oh boy, I'm going to get back at them, or I hope they learn their lesson, anything negative. See, the negative thought form, think of thoughts as being something not just amorphous, but like energy. You know, when we talk about light, we have light waves and photons that we think of thoughts as thougtrons. And we send out these thougtrons into the world around us. And those thotrons go out just like photons do, and they hit what is up beyond us, and light bounces back to us. And so our thotrons go out and they bounce back to us according to the patterns of which we've sent them out. So if we send out violent thoughts, even on a subtle level, even on a thinking level, then they bounce back to us in terms of negativity coming back to us. Negativity goes out, negativity comes back. Positivity goes out, positivity comes back. Law of karma. So we're talking here about the thought really, of course action has to follow thought, but the thought, and then beyond the control of our mental tendencies comes the subconscious thought patterns that we might have. So dreams or daydreams or tiny little reactions that don't even come up to the level of consciousness. You read something in the paper and you get kind of upset and hope, oh boy, I hope he gets it. You know, might be a politician you don't like, might be a country you don't like, anyway. So all of that needs to be controlled. So we need to control on different levels. Now, I can't go through everything in Patanjali Eightfold Path, but I wanted to set the stage so that we understand what's going on here. Now, finally, one of the keys to understanding that this is more than just behavior is that Patanjali says that certain powers come when we achieve perfection in these areas. So when we're completely nonviolent, think of that as having a consciousness that sends out no thotrons that arouse negativity or violence in the universe around us. None of that. And then Patanjali says that when we achieve that state, the universe becomes peaceful around us. And we can tame wild animals. Master tamed wild tigers. Sri Yukteswar would play with cobras. And, you know, so the universe, it's a magnetic exchange that's going on here at a deeper level. So then the yamas are the things that we have to control, are violence, the tendency to think negative thoughts, the tendency to lie. So the tendency to distort the truth or to say something that's not true because it gives an advantage to us. I'm sure no businessmen in India ever tell any lies. Something for their own advantage that might hurt their customers, or anywhere in the world, the business, So anyway, so we have to control that tendency, and when we do, then the magnetic exchanges, when we have that completely controlled, anything we say has to take place because we resonate in perfect truthfulness. So I'm just going to go through them quickly now. So non-violence, non-lying, non-stealing, can't take anything that doesn't belong to you, non-sensuality, and non-greed. Non-greed is interesting because that means that even that which you can rightfully have, you can't have too much of it. Or you'll kind of, it's like displacing too much of the, you're using up too much oxygen in the room. You need to leave some for other people. So the niyamas are cleanliness, contentment, austerity, self-study, and devotion to God or some form of God. And so think of that as the outer ring of our consciousness, of our behavior, but really of the energy that we send out and receive with the world around us. So the yamas and niyamas we can almost think of as our skin, because our skin is the organ that's outermost and that we relate to the world. That's what the barrier between us and the world is. So that's the outer ring of this target that I'm talking about. The next ring in has to do not with anything outside of ourself. It has to do with our own internal energies. And so the next three have to do with controlling the energy in our body. And of course, Kriya is one of the primary ways that we do this. But the next three are asana, meaning that if we're going to be released from the delusion that this body and personality, all these vrittis that the millions, billions that have accumulated over many lifetimes, thousands, millions of lifetimes, if we're going to be released from those, neutralize those, then it starts with being able to withdraw the energy. And that begins by being able to not fidget, to sit still. Because if we move around physically, or if we're uncomfortable physically, then we can't withdraw our energy. The next one, so that's asana. The next is pranayama, and then pratyahara. Pranayama is the control of the subtle force of prana. And so what that really means is, as we know from the practice of Kriya Yoga or other techniques on our path, energization, Hong Sa, Kriya, they're all techniques of pranayama. Because if we can withdraw the force that is creating disturbance, then we can stop the disturbance. I used this example, but not everyone was here. But imagine that every thought that you have when you sit to meditate is like a feather. So imagine having a table with bigger than this, a big table with 5,000 feathers on it. And those feathers are being blown every which way because there's a ceiling fan that's spinning much faster than these. It's spinning at higher revolutions. And it's blowing those feathers all over. And what we're doing is we're running after this feather and saying, bad feather, you shouldn't be scattered like that. Come back here. Bad thought. Oh, I'm guilty. I shouldn't have a thought about what I'm going to cook for breakfast while I'm trying to meditate. Oh no, there's another bad thought. And so all these feathers are flying all over the place. Our thoughts are restless and they're going all over the place. Now we will never chase down and connect, correct, replace all those feathers, because as soon as we replace a few, that ceiling fan is still blowing the other ones. So what's the solution? Cut the power to the ceiling fan. Turn it off. Pranayama. So when we control the prana that creates the restlessness in the mind, then the mind begins to come under control. Otherwise, it doesn't. And so that's why Devi said Patanjali is a universal path. It doesn't matter whether you're a Hindu yogi or a Christian monk or a Muslim or a Buddhist or an atheist. If you don't control the energy that is creating restlessness in your consciousness and restlessness in your vrittis, you aren't going to achieve release from the bundle of self-definitions. You aren't going to be able to neutralize those vrittis, which is the condition that we have to achieve before we're released from the sense of ego. And Patanjali says, when that condition is fulfilled, we rest in our true self. The self rests in itself. Under all other conditions, meaning when those vrittis aren't controlled, we're subject to the permutations of the world around us. And so, if we want to get beyond that, we have to shut off the energy to what is creating the restlessness. And restless prana creates restless thoughts. And it creates restless breath. There's a combination, connection between those three. Breath, mind, and prana. And so the great yogis have given us a science of pranayama that has to do with breathing exercises, but not just breathing exercises. Really, the prana is more subtle and it causes the outer breath. But we don't have time to go into much in depth. So, pranayama, and then pratyahara. Master said pratyahara is when the prana is withdrawn from the senses, and he says it's the shutting off of the sense telephones. And so if your mind is bothered by the ringtone on your mobile, or if you're in an audience like this and you have your mobile turned on and the ringtone is going, the answer is not to be mad at the phone, but to shut off the ringtone. And so withdrawal of prana from the various senses shuts off that sense telephones. Okay, that's the next circle in. So the outer circle is how we relate to the world around us. The next circle in has to do with energy. And it has to do with those three, pranayama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara. Then what happens if we get those under control? Then we begin to experience the state where the mind is no longer restless. And the first experience of this is the ability to concentrate completely on the object of our meditation. Let's, for the sake of tonight, say that we're trying to see the light at the spiritual eye. Well, when our prana is not yet controlled, we won't be able to see that clearly. We won't be able to hold our consciousness on it, even if we do see it, because our thoughts will be restless. So we have to control that. So if we can control the prana, then we can concentrate without the mind wavering. And when we can concentrate on an object, concentrate on light, or concentrate on sound, or concentrate on the image of Master or something, then when in the state of dharana, when the energy, the prana, has been controlled, we're able to concentrate without the mind wavering. When we're able to hold that state of concentration, so that we are first looking at the light, at the spiritual eye, but then we become so absorbed in that light that it's as if the observer and that which we're observing, the distance between those two ceases to be in practice. And so we don't observe the light, we become the light. And so in the state of dharana, after a meditation, we would come out and we'd say, I had this most beautiful meditation. I was able to see the light of the spiritual eye clearly, and my mind didn't waver at all. It was wonderful. That's the state of dharana. The state of dhyana would be described differently. I was meditating and I became light. I saw myself. I disappeared. All there was light there. There wasn't any I. There wasn't any distance. It was just light. I became absorbed in that light. And then the state of samadhi is when that light that we think of as our light ceases to be our light. It's just the universal light. And we are absorbed in our light first. If we can hold that absorption, then that light expands, and there's no longer any sense that it's us, I, me. There is no I or me, it's just universal consciousness, and that's what we become. But see how Patanjali has given us a roadmap to the sequential steps that get us into that deep state of union with God. And in that deep state, all of the vrittis, the vrittis have become neutralized, and therefore we achieve the condition by which Patanjali says that we become realized, or we go into the state of yoga. And so I found it helpful to think of Patanjali like a target with 3 concentric circles, and I hope you do too. Okay.